Hi everyone, my name is Anton Lelser, and today I'm going to give a brief introduction to the Transcrobes project, what it is and where it's heading. To begin with, a couple of words about my background. Originally from New Zealand, I did a couple of undergraduate degrees back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the first in general linguistics and the second in computing. I then moved to France and worked as a software engineer and consultant for almost 15 years. Mainly in the online advertising sector, and most recently at a major European behavior-based advertising provider in the engineering team. The project is supervised by Dr. John Lee, an expert in the use of computational linguistics and computer-assisted language learning. Today, I will very quickly run over the project goals, the theory behind Transcrobes that makes it different from both the academic and commercial software platforms that exist today, before moving on to a quick bird's eye view of the main components of the platform, and then on to a demo of one of the major modules that is live today. Lastly, I'll very briefly talk a little about the project roadmap before taking questions. Transcrobes is an open project. A significant amount of today's research is done behind closed doors, whether it be closed source or not publishing data, meaning that a lot of interesting research is lost and not available to the community at large to take, modify, and build upon. The open education movement is focused on creating and distributing educational resources for all to take and adapt to their needs. And this project sits squarely in that space. So while currently developed in the context of a PhD, the software project's main focus is to produce and actually make available a software platform that learners can use over several years. Language learning is such a complex, long-term and multifaceted process that I argue real research progress can only be made while observing real learners doing real long-term learning activities. The PhD project will run until the northern summer of 2023, but I'm hopeful that I can continue developing the project and we can find funding so that learners can continue to use the platform for free after that. So the software platform is being developed in the context of a PhD, and that is the main means of collecting and analyzing data for the thesis. The research context is to investigate how the quantification of a learner's L2 knowledge and deep personalization of comprehension aids based on this via a pummel can provide learners with a means to better construct and realize ideal L2 selves and identities, while at the same time improving standardized test results. This in turn ties back to the theory that underpins the entire undertaking, the theory of meaningful input-output, or meaningful IO for short. In essence, the theory is an attempt to integrate the various strands of the theories of Stephen Krashen with a critical and social constructionist approach to the questions of identity and motivation. So what does meaningful IO hypothesize? It hypothesizes that the necessary and sufficient condition for language acquisition is meaningful input. Given sufficient meaningful input and appropriate communicative contexts, a learner will start producing meaningful output, providing evidence that language acquisition has taken place. Unfortunately, time constraints don't allow us to explore that any further today, except to note that the choice of the word meaningful here is definitely intentional. The many meanings of meaningful are all relevant here, particularly those aspects linked to motivation and identity construction and exploration. Moving back to the more technical side. So conceptually, how does the platform enable learners to take control of their own learning journey? The goal is that the learner develops a digital representation, a model of their knowledge of a language. And with that information, Transcrobes is able to empower them to go out into the real world to discover real content on their terms. By knowing what a learner knows, the system also knows what they don't know. So it can provide context-based comprehension aids in place where the language is actually used, whether that be on the web, reading an ebook, watching video, listening to music, in an app, etc. As the user interacts with the digital material and comprehension aids, the system learns more and naturally adapts as the learner's knowledge increases. A real-life learner is embedded in the real world with teachers, parents, and significant others. These other stakeholders are important contributors to the success or failure of any educational experience, including second language learning. Decades of research into language learning autonomy have shown that by driving the process, learners own the process and are responsible for it. With Transcrobes, they can invite others to inspect their digital selves, potentially unveiling as little or as much as they see fit. Because the system will develop in-depth knowledge about the learners, it's crucial that they themselves have significant control over the process and become confident learners as they understand and master the mechanics of their own learning journeys. Now, different cultures also express privacy and data control in different ways. So the system needs to be flexible in that regard, making it possible for those who manage the platform to be able to do so in culturally appropriate ways. So, a set of open technologies are being developed and regularly deployed to participants with three kinds of client application: learner model inspection and analysis, active learning, and meaning-driven content consumption. The client applications will be available on a wide variety of platforms and devices and will be instrumented for rich data collection. In terms of technologies, one of the key aspects of the project is the open nature of everything that is being developed. One quite common feature of what appears to be a significant proportion of academic core projects is that if there is any software made available under an open source license, it is not directly usable for providing a rich, connected learning service for real learners. But Transcrobes doesn't want to only provide a service for real learners. It wants others, research groups, educational organizations, individuals, or even companies, to be able to take the code and related services and be able to provide an equivalent system for as cheaply as possible. By basing the system on freely available, best-in-class open source components and then battle testing them for experiments, others should be able to set up highly available, secure services quickly on very cheap infrastructure. This diagram attempts to show the various components of the system in a little bit more conceptual detail. On the one side, there are the human actors, the learners and the other stakeholders in the learning journey. On the other side, there are the various data sources that hold the evolving representations of learner knowledge. The various applications in the middle are the glue between the stakeholders and the digital language selves, and provide the activities for both learning and meta-learning, enabling both development of language competence and meta-knowledge about that knowledge of language development. The goal for the system is to truly empower learners to understand how their learning evolves so they can fully control it. So now it's time for a quick demo. Unfortunately, time constraints only allow looking in detail at one of the modules today, but I will be adding more material to the project website over the coming weeks, and learners can already sign up to use the platform today. So how does Transcrobes allow me to explore and express my identity? Because identity is very much a personal affair, I will use myself as an example. I am myself a low intermediate learner of Mandarin Chinese. I have a vocabulary of around 2,000 to 3,000 words, depending on how you classify words and what exactly is meant by knowing a word. An important aspect of my own identity is that I very much like to know what is happening in the world around me, particularly in the tech world. I'm a geek, and as such, I like to read about the latest tech news and have significant intrinsic motivation to know what is happening in the tech and science worlds. Because I'm naturally interested in this, and there is very little curated material I'm interested in available in Chinese for my exact level on this precise day, the best way for me to access material is to attempt to understand authentic tech news intended for native Chinese speakers. So let's take an example of some news hot off the press as this is being recorded. Here we have a Chinese language news website. However, as mentioned, my vocabulary is less than around 3,000 items, and that is definitely not enough to understand uncurated material intended for native speakers without help. Now, one of the ways to get around this is to integrate one of the many free browser extensions that enable you to get an immediate bilingual dictionary definition of the words you don't know by putting the cursor over the word. There are plenty of these out there already, and probably many millions of happy users across all languages. It fills a great niche. There have been many studies showing the utility of such glossing tools in the literature. However, one of the drawbacks of this approach with Chinese is that it requires me to know where words start and finish, and that is not guaranteed at my level. Another drawback is that it only really works when you have a mouse, and that is not the case on mobile devices. I, like the great majority of young language learners out there in the real world, consume most of my media on mobile devices. And let's say that I'm at about 70% of a given text. That also means that I'm going to need to be constantly moving the mouse in order to be able to get any sort of comprehension. This will be slow and cumbersome, and I won't be able to do much of it due to the relatively high cognitive load. It was at this point in my own language learning journey that I realized that as a learner who wanted to get learning value out of authentic material, basically to have learning happen as a side effect of me doing something I was going to do anyway, i.e. reading tech news, the key was to have the system automatically and proactively give me the help I needed to consume real material in a relaxed way. That way I can spend as much time as possible with the language without my brain exploding. But what should that help look like? So here we have an example of the most naive version of this. What the system is doing is taking all of the text, sending it to the server, and returning a significantly enriched version to the browser. All the words are separated, and all of them have been given context-dependent glosses. Text is now all clickable, with a pop-up that gives significant extra information, like full dictionary definitions. We here have the HSK level. Here is the frequency information. And for the cases when the sentence is still not understandable, we have a full sentence translation so that learners can get the information that they need to move on. So I would argue that what we have here is already adding quite a bit of value for learners. However, pages become very busy. By translating all of the words, I will naturally start focusing only on the English text, and the learning value will be significantly diminished. What I really need is something that is not going to show me the words that I already know. That way I get in-context reinforcement of the words I know and have repetition of L2, L1 word pairs for those that I don't know. So if we take this exact same text and simulate a learner who knows the most common 1,000 words, we get a version like the following. Here we see the most common words are no longer translated, but the great majority still are. Such texts are still going to be quite difficult for learners to appreciate, and the value of the tool a little limited. If we increase that to the most common 3,000 words, then we can see that we now start to have visible parts that don't get any translation. What is important to note, though, is that there are now words that aren't translated that I don't know, and still words that are translated that I do know. That decreases the enjoyment and increases the number of actions I need to take to understand the text. What is really needed is for the system to gloss only what I actually don't know. Now, there are two main ways this can happen. The system can guess, or I can tell it. Using a small set of test words to predict all known vocabulary items has been studied in the literature, and this will likely be added as one possible onboarding strategy in the future. However, a key aspect of pummel theory as put forward by the likes of Judy Kay, Bob Kummerfeld, and Susan Bull is learner control over the learner model. With an appropriately designed interface, many learners can indicate knowledge or lack of knowledge at over one vocabulary item per second, meaning a significant proportion of beginner and intermediate level learners of Chinese can cover the bulk of their vocabulary in under 1 hour. Here is the frequency ordered mass update interface, which allows learners to very quickly go through and indicate that they know or don't know a given vocabulary item. It will be evolved over time from learner feedback. What I'm expecting, though, is that learners spend as much time as they can be bothered going through such a frequency-based word list, and then actually interact with the system as they are consuming texts. You may have noticed a couple of buttons in the pop-up interface. One of these buttons allows the learner to indicate to the system that a word is already known, so it removes the gloss now and will not gloss the word going forward. For example, let's say that I've been reading lots about the coronavirus recently, and I now know that the word li can be translated as immunity. I no longer need that translated, so I can go ahead and tell the system not to translate that for me going forward. As I use the system and update it as I'm using it, it will stay up to date and I will stay in control. Now, obviously, all of these actions are generating data from real learners doing real learning. And that data can be analyzed to give us insights into how learners learn when they have such digital comprehension aids available. The system is now live, with a few real learners and accepting signups from learners who are willing to take part in the research. Obviously, as it's all open source, anyone can download the software and run their own version, so anyone can create their own equivalent system if they want. I'm hoping to get quite a few participants over the next 2.5 years of the thesis, though, and if resources permit, we'll be able to accommodate as many users as want to use this service. I've only had time to talk about the browser-based extensive reading extension today, but there are other live modules, including integrated dictionary functionality, spaced repetition via the Anki desktop and Anki Droid mobile apps, and an integrated survey module that allows the system to quickly construct and deploy surveys to learners on the platform. So what is planned moving forward? A critical aspect of a truly learner-centered platform is choice. Not all learners want to focus on extensive reading, and there are many other ways to find a voice in a second language. With everything connected to a common core, learners can use as many or as few tools as they feel comfortable with. The system keeps learning whatever they use, so the system will be able to immediately propose relevant optimized activities no matter what the learner chooses. Giving the learner rich, comprehensible insights into their own learning gives them the keys to drive their own success. That comes from allowing them to reflect and observe on their own development, so these tools need to be enriched significantly. Once learners start generating data, the creation of deeply personalized, optimal learning environments becomes a reality. With enough data, the system will be able to keep learners in highly satisfying learning flows at the top edge of their learning speeds. While there is still a lot of work to do, the system is now generating real learner data, and I'm hopeful to start reporting on the first production phase by Q2 of next year. Now, I'm more than happy to answer any live questions, and please get in touch via email if you have any offline questions or comments for me or Dr. Lee. Thanks.